What's up guys, it's Eric from Rare Candy and welcome back to another Forbidden Light deck profile, and today we're going to be taking a look at Xerneas GX, and this is going to be the same list that I actually featured in our recent testing rounds video. So if you guys want to see how this deck looks in action, I will be sure to have a link to that below in the description as well. And also guys, if you are new here to this channel and you're unfamiliar with those testing rounds videos, they typically feature our early, unrefined, rough starting points to begin testing from. So that means there might be a few things in this list that could potentially be tweaked or improved, so just something to keep in mind as we do go through this deck profile. So Xerneas GX, definitely a card I did not expect to do a video on. If you guys saw our set review, I was a little bit unenthused with the card, but you know what, I was looking at it and I was like, you know what, I think there actually might be a little bit of potential here. So here we have Xerneas GX Garbodor. Let's take a look at it. So we're playing 3 Xerneas GX, of course that is going to be our main attacker of the deck, 180 hit point, basic, 2 retreat cost, metal weakness, all fine and dandy. We also have dark resistance, which is actually pretty important to note just because of the popularity of Xerneas GX. But the attacks on this thing, let's take a look at it. Its first one, first a single colorless energy, 20 damage, and 20 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So at first glance, that doesn't really seem like too much, and honestly, it's not really the greatest attack, but this damage actually can set up some knockouts on your opponent's Tapu Leles. Once you factor in the math for its second attack, which is 2 fairy energy and a colorless to do 120, the math for this attack actually works out really nice as far as picking off Leles in the late game. So I think that really can't be underestimated. Decks that can pick off Leles in the late game to close out games is always a good quality to have, I think. So let's just go through it real quick. If you do this attack twice on a Lele, that's going to be 40 damage. And its second attack for 120, plus a Fighting Fury Belt, which we play in this list, will be just enough to actually take a knockout on Tapu Leles. So that is the reason, I was like, you know what, let's try to build around this card. The math works out good for killing Leles, that can't be that bad. But like I mentioned, the second attack is 2 Fairy and the colors for 120, just kind of a vanilla amount of damage. You're going to 2-shot basically everything in the current format, so at least you will 2-shot things. That is the nice part about the card. And up until this point, the card seems kind of average, nothing too special, but the GX attack is actually kind of interesting. For the same attack cost, 2 Fairy Energy and a colorless, you move all damage counters from all of your Pokemon to your opponent's active Pokemon. So that's actually a pretty crazy effect. Like I said, the first 2 attacks are very vanilla. They're not bad per se, they're just not particularly great. But, this GX attack I think kind of inspired me a little bit to start building around this. And basically we're just trying to tank hits with this deck and ensure that we can outlive our opponent. And this GX attack is one way we can ensure that we can do that. So in the mid to late game, once your board is a little bit tattered up and beaten down, you can use this GX attack to hopefully clear your board of all its damage and take a knockout in the process. So very similar to the Alolan Ninetales GX back from I almost said Crystal Guardians. Guardians Rising, my mistake. But, kind of beefed up on steroids. So really nice GX attack on this thing if you're able to successfully stay alive. So that's going to be our main attacker, but we're also running one of the other Xerneas that we still have in format for its attack, Geomancy. Search your deck for 2 Fairy Energies, attach them, 1 to each of your bench Pokemon. So this is nice. It's a decent little early game Pokemon we can lead the game with. Start getting some energy on the field. Also, it has a half-decent attack. Rainbow Spear for 2 Fairy and a colorless does 100, and you discard an energy attached to this Pokemon. So you do have, hopefully, some ways of dealing with the Baby Hoopa. If you're still running into that type of deck, you will have a non-GX to use in those types of matchups. But like I said, it's mainly just for getting a little bit of early game energy acceleration going. But then we're also still playing another non-GX attack. We're playing 1 copy of Mewtwo from Evolutions for that Psychic attack, 20 plus 20 more for every energy on your opponent's active. So this type of deck, I think Buzzwole is probably going to be pretty good against this, especially if we can't get our Fighting Fury Belts down. So I wanted to have a way to, force a 7 prize game with a decent attacker against Buzzwole. So Mewtwo seems really nice in those types of matchups. Also against things like Espeon Garbodor, Mewtwo is a half-decent attacker against Espeon GX. So it just seemed like a nice little 1 prize attacker to have in this list. And then going on to the rest of the Pokemon, we have 2 copies of Trubbish and 2 copies of Garbodor. And that's going to be for that Garbotoxin ability. If it has a tool card, it shuts off abilities for all Pokemon in play. So luckily, none of our attackers really care about abilities. So Garbodor is just a nice little form of disruption in this deck. And it's also going to be good at shutting off some of the decks that can typically knock us out in 1 hit. So if you're going against like a Duskmane Necrozma deck, they do hit you for weakness, which is already pretty bad. But if you're able to get Garbotoxin out, they can't stream knockouts quite as easily with their Magazine turned off. Similarly, Tapu Bulu GX, if you don't have a Fighting Fury Belt down on your Xerneas just yet, if they're able to keep streaming KOs with their, thanks to their Vikavolt, which can accelerate energy, you're going to be in a bad spot. So it's really nice against these decks that can knock you out in one hit, which is kind of Xerneas' I guess, biggest downfall. It seems really nice against decks that can two-shot you, but against decks that one-shot you, you're going to have some problems. So it just seems like it has some natural synergy with Xerneas GX. And then the last Pokemon in the list, of course, is 2 copies of Tapu Lele GX, just to search supporters out of our deck. Now, of course, we do play Max Elixirs in this deck as well, so we can use Energy Drive and power up a Tapu Lele to use that attack as well, but mainly, of course, just for Wonder Tag. Then going on to our supporter cards, we're playing 3 copies of Professor Sycamore. Just a nice form of draw support. Discard your hand, draw 7 cards. So really great in these basic heavy decks, since you don't have too many moving pieces like rare candies or evolution lines most of the time. But we're still playing some other supporters in here. We're playing 3 copies of Cynthia as well. The new draw supporter back from Ultra Prism. Shuffle your hand into your deck, draw 6 cards. And of course 3 copies of N as well. N in conjunction with Garbodor is just always a pretty good combo, so I still wanted to have at least 3 of this. So each player shuffles in, draws equal to the amount of prize cards that they have left. And then the other draw supporter we're playing is 1 copy of Lily. So we're actually not playing Bridget in this list at all. So we're going to be opting for a different turn 1 supporter. Very similar in the structure of the deck to the Buzzwole Garbodor type of deck in terms of how you play it. So just like that deck typically runs Lily instead of Bridget, we're kind of doing the same thing here. So you get to draw until you have 6 cards, but if it's your first turn, you get drawn until you have 8. So it's a really nice first turn supporter to lead the game with. And then to round out the rest of the supporters, just 3 copies of Guzma. Choose what we want to take knockouts on. Pretty straightforward. And then going into the item cards, we're playing, of course, 4 Ultra Ball search Pokemon out of the deck, but we're also still playing 2 copies of Nest Ball. So like I mentioned, we are not playing Bridget in this deck, so I think it's still important to have other outs to searching out our basic Pokemon. If you notice, we actually don't run that many Pokemon in general in the deck, so having some extra search cards to search out the few that we run is going to be really important, I think. Next up in the list, we are going to be playing 4 copies of Max Elixir as well. So this is just kind of a staple of these basic attacking decks. You look at the top 6 cards of your deck, attach a basic energy you find there to one of your benched basic Pokemon. That's going to help our Xerneas GX get up and running a little bit quicker. Pretty straightforward there. And next up we have a pretty interesting card list. That's going to be 4 copies of Fairy Drop. So you get to heal 50 damage from one of your Pokemon that has any fairy energy attached to it. So like I said, we're basically trying to outlive our opponent with this deck. So when we factor in Fairy Drop, you know, we're going to be healing a lot of damage. If our opponent just swings on us, let's just say, with a Gliscopod GX as an example, they can typically hit us for about 100 to 120 damage. Fairy Drop can basically heal off all of that damage just kind of in one go with 2 of these things. So Fairy Drop, a really good card at just ensuring the survivability of this deck. That's going to be kind of the game plan, like I said. We're basically just trying to outlive the decks that can 2-shot us. Also against the Zoroark variants, Xerneas seems pretty decent. You have Resistance. We also play Parallel City in the list, which we'll talk about shortly. And we play the Fairy Drop. So I think on paper, you're probably actually good to go against Zoroark decks. So if you have a lot of Zoroark in your meta, maybe Xerneas actually could be pretty decent. But then we're also playing 3 copies of Fighting Fury Belt as well. I did briefly mention these earlier. So this is to give our Xerneas 40 more HP and also increases the damage of our attacks by 10, which is actually kind of relevant in terms of taking knockouts on Tapu Lele's. Also getting down a Fighting Fury Belt on Mewtwo can be really nice in certain matchups, especially if your opponent is playing something like a Gallade or something like that that can normally hit you for 130. Your Mewtwo can survive hits from that. And just in general, it makes your opponent really have to commit a lot of resources to knocking out just a single prize attacker like this. So Fury Belt definitely makes a lot more sense in this type of deck as opposed to something like Choice Band. And next up we are playing 4 copies of Floatstone. Of course this is a Garbodor based deck, so we need some ways to ensure that we can retreat Garbodor since it has a pretty steep retreat cost while also activating its ability. So that's how we're playing the Floatstone. Also helps us get the turn 1 Geomancy if we want to do that, or attack turn 1 with our Xerneas GX as well if we do start with something that we don't want to. So then next up we're playing 1 copy of Super Rod just to get back Pokemon energy back into our deck. Also, since we are playing Max Elixir, I do probably prefer Super Rod over something like Rescue Stretcher in this list, just because we can get energy back into our deck to increase our chances of our Max Elixirs working more effectively. So it definitely seems like a little bit better than Rescue Stretcher in this list. And the last trainer card is going to be 2 copies of Parallel City. So we're playing this just for some added bit of disruption. I've said that in a couple videos. Garbodor, Parallel City N is one of my favorite combos in the game. So being able to actually get that off is really, really nice. We can turn off abilities, limit our opponent's bench to only 3 Pokemon, and then end them to a low hand size. It can be really good in just so many matchups, especially against Zoroark decks. Like I said, with Parallel City limiting their bench size, which limits their damage output, with your resistance, with Fighting Fury, but with Fairy Drop, you have all sorts of ways to deal with Zoroark variants, I think. And just in general, it's very good against other decks, like Tapu Bulu GX as an example. If you don't have a Fighting Fury belt down, if you actually put the blue side of Parallel City towards yourself, that will decrease their damage output, which will usually make your Xerneas survive a Nature's Judgment at some point. So Parallel City just seems like a natural fit for this deck. You could play something like Fairy Garden in this deck if you did want to, if you wanted to give your Pokemon free retreat if they have Fairy Energy. If you do that, I think you would need to adjust the tool cards. Floatstone probably wouldn't be as good, so if you do want to play Fairy Garden, definitely cut your Floatstones in place of something else. But like I said, I like Parallel City and Garbodor variants most of the time. And that's going to be it for the trainer cards. Just to round out the list, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 copies of Fairy Energy, just to round out the list. That pretty much ensures we can usually hit them off of our Max Elixirs, and we'll always have one to attach for turn. But yeah, guys, that's going to be this list we're trying out for Xerneas GX. Like I mentioned earlier, not a card that I initially really was that excited for, but I actually kind of like the general playstyle of this deck. You're basically just tanking hits and outliving any deck that can't one-shot you, which is actually kind of nice. So Xerneas GX, a card, you know, I think not one that a lot of people had a ton of high hopes for, but honestly, it's been better than I expected out of the games that I've messed around with. But anyways, guys, that's going to be it for this one. Like I said, definitely stay tuned for the channel. We have a ton of Forbidden Light coverage coming up over the next couple weeks, so definitely stay tuned. But as usual, feel free to like and subscribe, and if you guys can support this channel by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/rarecandytcg, or by picking up something from our online store, like the playmat you saw in this video, at rarecandytcg.com, it would be greatly appreciated. But with that, I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you for the next one.